So in this video, we're now going to start looking at how do we predict the random number set that's going to appear if we're given some values. So here we have some practice that says for each of the following, determine the set of random numbers. So here we have to think about not only, okay, what numbers are they giving us inside of these parentheses, but what type do we have? So this one is the random, which remember is going to produce a float. So that's the first thing you want to note is this random number set is going to produce a float. And by default, this gives us values between 0 and 1. So what I would expect to see if I asked you to make some sort of prediction is you would say, okay, well, for this one, it's a float, and x is going to be 0 bigger than 0, so that's where x falls here, and it'll go all the way up to 1, but it won't quite reach 1. So anything for a float, I would expect to see written in this type of fashion to account for every sort of float. But we start at 0, we include 0, we go all the way up to 1, but don't quite include 1. Then here we have rand range, which we know is going to produce an integer. And here we see 5 and 12. We only see two numbers. So we know that means we're going to start at 5. We'll include 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, but we won't quite include 12 there. 12 is not included in the number set. So this rand range instruction will produce a random number that is an integer between 5 and 11, and you could simply write those out if you wanted to specify. Here, again, we're going to produce an integer. We're going to start then at -3, and we'll go all the way up to 0, but not quite include 0. So we again see rand range with two numbers. This is the number where we start, and we produce random numbers until the number right before we reach 0. So we would produce random numbers of these three types. Here we have rand range with three numbers, so we know that we start at 40, so it's going to be an integer that starts at 40, and then they're going to be 20 apart until we either hit 100 or go over 100. So here 20, the next one would be 60, the next one would be 80, and the next one will be 100, but we don't include 100 in our set, so we know that this instruction would produce a random number that is an integer that is either 40, 60, or 80. And then this last one here is going to be just like the one we just did, but it has three different numbers. So again, here we're going to produce an integer because we're using rand range. They start at 5, and then we're going to go 4 counts apart until we hit 20 or go beyond 20. So we have 9, the next one would be 13, the next one would be 17, and then after that we would hit 21, but we know anything beyond 20 is not included. So this instruction would create a random number of 5, 9, 13, or 17. So you should now be able to make predictions about the random number sets we're going to have. Now, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to look at math with random numbers. And I just want to talk about, what's going to happen when we multiply, say, that random set of numbers by 5, or we add 1 to it. So we're going to look at what happens when we do this, and we can even use our examples here to help us out if we want to. So I'm going to uncomment some of these so that I can use them as we talk. So the first thing we see is we see random number times 5. So I'm just going to use this first set here. And I'm going to put times 5 on the outside. You can notice here that we have that multiplication of 5 happening after the random function. So here, if I run this, here it goes. What you see are that our random range has been a little bit expanded. So we see that it's no longer between 0 and 1, but it looks like it's closer to between 0 and 5, because here we have a 4.77. And that's pretty much what multiplication does. It allows us to expand or alter our range. So here with random, what this does is it expands our range to be from 0, and so I'm going to put a little enter here. Our random range, this is what it used to be. It used to be 0 was less than or equal to x was less than 1. And when you multiply something by 5 with random, what it does is it takes this outside part and it does 0 times 5, which is still 0. And then it does 1 times 5, which is 5. So what this does is it expands our range to be floats that range from 0 and go all the way up to 5. That's exactly what we are seeing here. Now, if we did this again, but we used type 2 instead, so you can see the example here, we're going to do, I have to put another comment, and there we go. So this one, we're going to change it to be 1, 6, which we know would produce numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what we're going to do now is on the outside, we're going to multiply by 5. So I can add that in there. So I'm going to run this as well. And what you will see is now our range is not 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but it looks like it's, okay, 1 times 5 is 5, 2 times 5 is 10, 3 times 5 is 15, 4 times 5 is 20, and 5 times 5 is 25. So it's turned into multiples of 5. So to explain to you what's really happening here is rand range 1, 6 would really produce 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. But this multiplication of 5 is really doing 1 times 5, which is 5. 2 times 5, so 2 times 5, which turns into 10. 3 times 5, which turns into 15. 4 times 5, which turns into 20. And 5 times 5, which turns into 25. So basically it tells us, okay, we'll have numbers 1 through 5, and then we're going to multiply them all by 5, which is why this rand range produces 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. Then from here, we're going to look at addition. So this is just another example of multiplication with random numbers. We talked about how it expands the range and then how it takes, okay, this would be 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then it multiplies them all by 6, and this would be the random set they would produce. So just kind of keeping in mind how multiplication works. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at addition. So we're going to change this a little bit. Again, we're going to take our comments and take them out there. And we're going to focus on random plus 7. So notice here I'm going to take random plus 7. So I'm not multiplying by 5 anymore. And when I run this code, what I notice is that everything has an integer part here of 7, and nothing goes above 7. So what this really does is it simply moves your random set to having a different starting value. So what I mean by this is here with this one, originally, this would have been 0 is less than or equal to x, oops, not symbol there, which is less than 1. That's what it would have been. And it takes all of these and it adds 7 to the range. So it figures out what that random set is. 0 plus 7 is 7. 1 plus 7 is 8. So if we re-look at our set of random numbers here, or if we just rerun it, what you will notice is that they can include 7, they're all less than 8. So it's still only a 1 unit width in our range there, but now they moved up and they start at 7. So now if we experiment with this again with the second set there, so we'll comment this out on top and comment this one out. We can then take, okay, well, 2, 7, what we expect that to do, and I'm just going to make a note down here. Moved it a little too much there. That would still be 8. So 2, 7, we would expect to be the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, not including 7. And what we're doing here is we're adding 10. So if we run this, what we notice is we're getting 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So when we have addition here, what it does is it takes our set of random numbers, so 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and it adds 10 to them. So 2 plus 10, that's 12. 3 plus 10, that's 13. 4 plus 10, that's 14. 5 plus 10, that's 15. 6 plus 10, that's 16. So you can see how addition and multiplication work in slightly different ways. So what you're going to see here is just some extra random notes about random. And this one, if we add 9, it moves the range up to starting at that particular value. And here it just takes every single random number that would be generated, so 2, 3, 4, and it would add 11 to it. So we would see 11, 13, 13, 14, and 15 because we would add 11 to all of them.